The world watched in tense anticipation as Saddam Hussein stood resolute against overwhelming international pressure in the months leading to the Gulf War. But why did Saddam refuse to back down? Why did he choose confrontation over diplomacy when the odds were stacked against him? Was it sheer hubris, a calculated gamble, or a desperate bid to assert dominance in a rapidly changing region? In this animated documentary, we delve deep into the complex web of political, economic, and personal factors that drove Saddam Hussein to defy the global community and invade Kuwait in August 1990. From the scars left by the Iran-Iraq War to Saddam's vision of regional supremacy, from economic desperation to his relationships with superpowers, this story is far more than a simple tale of aggression. Join us as we uncover the layers behind Saddam's decision, exploring the ambitions, miscalculations, and geopolitical chess moves that led to one of the most pivotal conflicts of the late 20th century, the Gulf War. Stay tuned as history comes alive, revealing why Saddam didn't back down, and how that choice shaped the modern Middle East forever. To understand why Saddam Hussein refused to back down before the Gulf War, we need to first examine the regional and personal context that shaped his decisions. By the late 1980s, Saddam was a leader hardened by conflict and motivated by both ambition and survival. Throughout the 1980s, Iraq was locked in a brutal war with Iran. The Iran-Iraq War, lasting from 1980 to 1988, drained Iraq's resources, devastated its economy, and left Saddam's regime vulnerable. Although Iraq had claimed victory, the war ended without any clear territorial gains and left deep animosities between the two neighbors. Saddam had accumulated enormous debts during the war, particularly to Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, which had supported Iraq financially to counterbalance Iran's revolutionary influence. Economically, Iraq faced severe difficulties. Oil prices plummeted worldwide in the late 1980s, reducing Iraq's primary revenue source. Saddam saw Kuwait's overproduction of oil as a deliberate act to keep prices low and further weaken Iraq's economy. He also accused Kuwait of slant drilling into Iraqi oil fields near the border, exacerbating tensions between the two countries. Politically, Saddam's regime was intensely nationalistic. He envisioned Iraq as the dominant power in the Arab world and saw Kuwait as historically part of Iraq. He believed that reclaiming Kuwait would not only solve Iraq's economic problems, but also restore Iraqi pride and regional influence. Internationally, the end of the Cold War was reshaping global alliances. Saddam had initially enjoyed some tacit support or tolerance from Western powers during the Iran-Iraq War. However, his invasion of Kuwait in August 1990 challenged the post-Cold War order. The United States and its allies condemned the aggression, leading to a buildup of coalition forces in the Gulf region. Before the invasion, Saddam sent mixed signals to the international community. He engaged in diplomatic talks, but simultaneously prepared for military action. His confidence was bolstered by the belief that the West would not intervene militarily, influenced by his previous experience and misreading of international responses. Moreover, Saddam's internal control over Iraq was tightening. He ruled through fear and repression, and his standing among the Iraqi elite and military demanded strength. Backing down could have been seen as weakness, potentially threatening his grip on power. In sum, Saddam's decision not to back down was shaped by a combination of economic desperation, regional ambitions, miscalculations of international will, and the imperative to maintain domestic authority. The stage was set for conflict. Saddam Hussein's refusal to back down before the Gulf War was not merely impulsive aggression, it was a calculated decision rooted in a complex mix of strategy, ideology, and perceived necessity. Understanding these motivations requires a closer look at Saddam's mindset and the geopolitical dynamics of the time. First and foremost, Saddam viewed the invasion of Kuwait as a strategic necessity to relieve Iraq's economic distress. After the costly 8-year war with Iran, Iraq was burdened with debts estimated at around $80 billion, much of it owed to neighboring Gulf states, including Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Oil prices had plummeted due to overproduction, especially by Kuwait, which Saddam accused of deliberately undermining Iraq's economy. By seizing Kuwait's oil reserves and resources, Saddam aimed to solve Iraq's financial crisis, gain leverage over the oil markets, and restore economic stability. Saddam also believed Kuwait was historically Iraqi territory. The borders drawn by the British in the early 20th century were seen by Saddam and many Iraqis as artificial and illegitimate. He portrayed the invasion as a reunification rather than conquest, appealing to nationalist sentiments both domestically and across the Arab world. This narrative helped justify his actions and maintain internal support. Another critical factor was Saddam's perception of international responses. Throughout the build-up to the invasion, he sought signals from global powers, particularly the United States. Some accounts suggest that Saddam misinterpreted ambiguous messages from U.S. officials as tacit approval, or at least an indication that the U.S. would not militarily intervene if Iraq acted against Kuwait. This misreading emboldened Saddam, reinforcing his calculation that the costs of invasion were manageable. Saddam's regime was also deeply authoritarian and intolerant of perceived weakness. Internally, showing resolve and strength was essential to maintain control over Iraq's fractious society and powerful military. To back down after decades of fighting and struggle would have been seen as a betrayal of Iraq's honor and a threat to Saddam's grip on power. His personal style of leadership emphasized fear, loyalty, and the projection of invincibility. Ideologically, Saddam promoted himself as a champion of Arab nationalism and resistance against Western domination. His anti-imperialist rhetoric portrayed the Gulf War as a struggle between the Arab world and foreign influence. This narrative helped him justify defiance against international sanctions and threats. Moreover, Saddam underestimated the speed and unity of the international coalition formed against him. He believed that Arab states would remain divided and that global powers would be reluctant to engage in another Middle Eastern conflict. This miscalculation was partly due to Iraq's previous experiences, where international reactions were limited. Finally, Saddam's military strategy reflected confidence in his armed forces and his belief in the deterrent power of his army. Despite years of war, Iraq maintained one of the largest and most battle-hardened militaries in the region. Saddam counted on this strength to withstand any coalition attacks or at least to negotiate from a position of power. In summary, Saddam Hussein's decision to stand firm before the Gulf War was shaped by a potent combination of economic desperation, nationalist ideology, misreading of international diplomacy, internal political considerations, and confidence in military capabilities. These factors converged to create a moment where retreat was not a viable option in Saddam's eyes, setting the stage for one of the most significant conflicts in modern Middle Eastern history. When Saddam Hussein's forces crossed into Kuwait in August 1990, the international community responded swiftly and decisively. What followed was a coalition unlike any seen before, representing a broad spectrum of nations united against Iraq's aggression. Understanding why Saddam did not back down before the Gulf War means also understanding the dynamics of this global response and its profound consequences. The United States, under President George H.W. Bush, led the charge in condemning Iraq's invasion. Within days, the United Nations Security Council passed a series of resolutions demanding Iraq's immediate withdrawal from Kuwait and imposing comprehensive economic sanctions. These sanctions aimed to cripple Iraq's economy and force Saddam to reconsider his occupation. But diplomacy alone was not enough. The United States spearheaded a massive military buildup in the Gulf region, known as Operation Desert Shield. Over 500,000 troops from the U.S. and allied countries, including the United Kingdom, France, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, were deployed to protect Saudi Arabia and prepare for potential combat operations to liberate Kuwait. Saddam initially seemed unfazed by these measures. He conducted a propaganda campaign portraying himself as a defender of Arab sovereignty and accused the coalition of imperialism. This message resonated with some factions in the Arab world, though many Arab states opposed his actions and joined the coalition. The coalition's military readiness sent a clear message. Iraq's occupation would not be tolerated indefinitely. Yet Saddam still refused to withdraw, perhaps miscalculating the coalition's resolve or believing that economic and diplomatic pressures would eventually force a compromise favorable to him. Saddam's intransigence led to Operation Desert Storm, the combat phase launched in January 1991. A devastating air campaign targeted Iraqi military infrastructure, followed by a swift ground offensive that liberated Kuwait in just over a month. The consequences for Iraq were severe. The war inflicted massive damage on its military and infrastructure. The sanctions continued, strangling the economy and leading to widespread hardship among the Iraqi population. Politically, Saddam's regime was weakened, but he retained power. However, his decision not to back down before the war isolated Iraq internationally and set the stage for years of conflict and sanctions. Saddam's gamble failed largely due to the unprecedented unity of the international coalition and the overwhelming military superiority of coalition forces. His belief that regional divisions and global reluctance to intervene would protect him proved a critical miscalculation. Moreover, the Gulf War shifted geopolitical dynamics in the Middle East. It reaffirmed U.S. influence, altered Arab alliances, and left a legacy of tension and instability that influenced future conflicts. In retrospect, Saddam's refusal to back down can be seen as a combination of pride, miscalculation, and desperation, factors that culminated in a devastating conflict with long-lasting repercussions. Saddam Hussein's decision not to back down before the Gulf War was a defining moment in modern Middle Eastern history. It revealed a leader driven by a mix of ambition, pride, and miscalculation, whose choices would have profound consequences for his country and the world. The invasion of Kuwait was more than a territorial dispute. It was a statement of intent from Saddam to assert Iraq's dominance in the region. Yet his refusal to retreat in the face of overwhelming international opposition led to a swift and decisive response that reshaped global geopolitics. Saddam's calculations, economic pressures, historical claims, military strength, and perceived international ambiguity ultimately failed to prevent coalition forces from dismantling his ambitions. Instead, the Gulf War exposed vulnerabilities in his regime, leading to years of sanctions, internal unrest, and eventual downfall. The legacy of Saddam's defiance remains complex. For some, he was a symbol of resistance against foreign intervention. For many others, he was a ruthless dictator whose actions brought devastation. The Gulf War's aftermath set the stage for subsequent conflicts, including the 2003 Iraq War and the broader instability in the region. Reflecting on why Saddam did not back down helps us understand the interplay between personal leadership styles and larger geopolitical forces. It underscores how individual decisions by powerful leaders can trigger monumental events with lasting effects. Ultimately, Saddam's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris and misjudgment in international relations. His failure to heed warnings and seek diplomacy led to ruin not only for himself, but for millions of Iraqis who suffered the consequences. As we look back on the Gulf War, it serves as a reminder of the complexities behind conflict, where pride, politics, economics, and history collide, and the importance of careful leadership in navigating the fragile balance of global peace.